My name is Darren Cole. I'm 45 years old, and until a few months ago, I was the operations manager at Northwest Timber Products in Spokane, Washington. I joined the company right after finishing my MBA and spent 12 years turning an inefficient system into an operation recognized for sustainability and productivity. When a new CEO took over, I was fired without warning and replaced by his former golf buddy, someone with zero management experience and no background in the timber industry. On paper, my departure was called cultural restructuring. In reality, it was a maneuver to hide something much bigger. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. I started at Northwest in early 2013. Back then, the company was struggling. Waste was high, safety protocols were outdated, and our sustainability practices were practically non-existent. I spent years modernizing every aspect of operations. I implemented lean manufacturing principles, upgraded our equipment, and established partnerships with environmental certification programs. By 2019, we had reduced waste by 38% and earned multiple industry awards. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was solid. I knew every inch of that facility, every supplier relationship, every operational detail that kept us competitive. Then Trevor Hartley showed up. Trevor was 41, recruited from a competitor with promises of transformative leadership. He arrived in October 2024 with expensive suits, a firm handshake, and absolutely no understanding of how timber operations actually worked. Within weeks, he started making changes. He brought in outside consultants who had never set foot in a mill. He cut investments in equipment maintenance. He shifted budget priorities toward branding and marketing campaigns that did nothing for our bottom line. I noticed the warning signs immediately. Trevor held meetings where he talked about dynamic vision and cultural alignment, but couldn't answer basic questions about production capacity or supply chain logistics. He surrounded himself with people who nodded along to everything he said. The experienced managers, people who had been with the company for decades, were gradually sidelined. In December 2024, rumors started circulating. Word was that Trevor was negotiating deals with companies that had personal connections to him. Nothing concrete, just whispers in the break room and concerned looks from longtime employees. I didn't jump to conclusions, but I started paying closer attention. January 2025 changed everything. Trevor called me into his office on a Wednesday morning. No warning, no explanation, just, "Darren, we need to talk." I walked in and found him sitting behind his desk with that rehearsed executive smile. He didn't waste time. "We're making some leadership changes," he said. "The board and I have decided to move in a different direction with operations management. We need someone who aligns better with our new vision." I asked what that meant specifically. What wasn't working? What metrics had declined? He waved the question away. "It's not about performance, Darren. It's about fit, cultural fit. We're bringing in Greg Wilson. He's got fresh perspective and energy that matches where we're headed." Greg Wilson. I knew the name. He was Trevor's golf buddy from his previous company. 39 years old, background in sales, zero operational experience. He'd never managed a production facility, never dealt with EPA regulations, never negotiated with timber suppliers. He was completely unqualified, but that wasn't the point. The point was getting me out. "You'll have 4 weeks for transition," Trevor continued. "We'll provide a severance package, standard terms. I'm sure you understand this is business, nothing personal." I understood perfectly. It was extremely personal. I just didn't show it. "I'll need access to complete the transition properly," I said calmly. "Documentation, ongoing projects, supplier contracts." "Of course," Trevor agreed. "We want this to be smooth." He had no idea what he'd just given me. Over the next 4 weeks, I became invisible. I showed up every day, answered emails, trained Greg on basic procedures. On the surface, I was the model of professional cooperation. But beneath that calm exterior, I was documenting everything. My assistant, Thomas Brennan, had been with me for 6 years. He was 28, sharp, and loyal. More importantly, he had access to systems that most people overlooked. When I mentioned noticing some irregularities in recent vendor contracts, he understood immediately what I was asking without me saying it directly. "I can pull reports from the last 6 months," he offered quietly one afternoon. "Comparative analysis, contract terms, approval workflows might help with the transition documentation." "That would be helpful," I replied. "Be thorough." Thomas was very thorough. The first red flag appeared in a consulting contract dated November 2024. Trevor had authorized payment of $240,000 to Hartley Strategic Solutions for operational assessment and restructuring advisory. The company was registered in Delaware, but the principal address traced back to Trevor's brother-in-law in Seattle. The contract had been signed without board approval, buried in discretionary spending that didn't require executive committee review. The second flag was even more obvious. A timber supply agreement with Pacific Ridge Resources offered rates 15% below market value. Generous, except Pacific Ridge was partly owned by Trevor's former college roommate. The contract included exclusivity clauses that would have locked us into below-market rates for 3 years, effectively transferring millions in value to Trevor's personal network. Then came the outsourcing plan. Thomas found it in a folder marked Confidential Strategic Planning. The document outlined a complete restructuring that would eliminate 60% of our operational staff and replace them with contractors from a firm called Global Efficiency Partners. The projected savings looked impressive on paper, $8.2 million annually. But when I analyzed the actual costs, contractor rates, management fees, transition expenses, the real savings were less than $1 million. The rest was accounting manipulation and hidden fees that would flow directly to Global Efficiency Partners, a company where Trevor's former business partner sat on the board. The plan had never been presented to the board of directors. Trevor was implementing it piece by piece, disguising it as routine operational adjustments. My termination was just the beginning. He planned to systematically replace every experienced manager with outside contractors, then present it to the board as a done deal. I made copies of everything: contracts, emails, budget projections, approval memos. I organized them chronologically with cross-references and supporting documentation. Every claim I made could be verified through official company records. I wasn't guessing or speculating. I had proof. Greg Wilson started in early February 2025. His first day was a disaster. He showed up 2 hours late, claiming he'd gotten lost finding the facility. During our walkthrough, he confused kiln drying with pressure treatment, asked if we outsourced the tree cutting part, and suggested we could probably save money by buying cheaper wood. I answered his questions patiently, made detailed notes about his training, and watched him fumble through basic operational concepts. He spent most afternoons in Trevor's office, laughing loudly about golf tournaments and restaurant recommendations. They weren't running a timber company. They were running a social club. Meanwhile, I reached out to Elaine Robinson. Elaine was 63 and had served on Northwest's board for 18 years. She was a former CFO at a manufacturing conglomerate, known for asking difficult questions and not accepting vague answers. We'd worked together on several sustainability initiatives, and she respected operational expertise. If anyone on the board would listen, it would be Elaine. I called her on a Saturday morning in mid-February. "Elaine, I need to discuss something sensitive about recent changes at Northwest," I said. "I have documentation that suggests serious governance issues. Would you be willing to review it?" There was a pause, then, "What kind of issues, Darren?" "Conflicts of interest, unauthorized contracts, undisclosed relationships between company vendors and executive family members, financial projections that don't match actual analysis." Another pause, longer this time. "Send me what you have. Encrypted email. I'll review it this weekend." I sent her everything. 130 pages of contracts, emails, financial analysis, and organizational charts showing the connections between Trevor, his associates, and the companies receiving favorable treatment. I included my own analysis documenting how the projected savings were fabricated and how the real costs had been hidden. Monday afternoon, Elaine called back. "I've reviewed your materials," she said, her voice tight. "This is worse than I thought. I'm scheduling an emergency board meeting. You'll need to present this directly." "Trevor will try to block it," I warned. "Trevor doesn't control the board," Elaine replied coldly. "I do my homework, Darren. I've already spoken to 3 other board members. They're equally concerned. The meeting is set for March 15th. Be prepared to walk through everything." I spent the next 3 weeks preparing my presentation. I didn't tell anyone except Thomas, who helped me compile additional supporting documents. Greg remained oblivious, still spending his days pretending to understand operational reports while actually planning his next golf outing with Trevor. The man had been in the position for 6 weeks and still couldn't explain our production workflow. Trevor seemed confident everything was going according to his plan. He announced the first wave of organizational optimization in early March. 12 operational positions eliminated, replaced by contractors from global efficiency partners. He presented it as cost savings. The board, not yet aware of what I'd uncovered, approved it in a routine vote. He thought he'd won. March 15th arrived. The board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the executive conference room. I arrived 30 minutes early with my documentation organized in labeled folders. Elaine was already there, along with 4 other board members. They looked serious. Trevor walked in at exactly 2 o'clock with Greg trailing behind him. He looked surprised to see me. "Darren, I didn't realize you'd be joining us," he said, forcing a smile. "Mr. Cole has requested time to address the board regarding operational matters," Elaine stated formally. "We've granted that request. Please sit down, Trevor." The smile vanished from Trevor's face, but he sat. I opened my presentation with a simple statement. "I'm here to present evidence of financial misconduct, conflicts of interest, and unauthorized commitments that pose significant legal and financial risk to Northwest Timber Products." Then I walked them through everything, document by document, transaction by transaction, showing exactly how Trevor had used his position to benefit companies connected to his personal network, how he'd implemented major changes without board approval, and how the projected savings were fabricated to hide what was actually a wealth transfer scheme. Trevor tried to interrupt multiple times. Each time, Elaine shut him down. "You'll have your turn to respond, Mr. Hartley. Let him finish." By the time I reached the outsourcing analysis, showing how $8 million in claimed savings was actually less than $1 million after accounting for hidden fees and contractor markups, 2 board members were making notes furiously. Another was shaking his head in visible disgust. I finished with the organizational chart showing every connection between Trevor's associates and the companies receiving contracts. It looked exactly like what it was, a corruption network operating inside a legitimate business. The room went silent. Trevor's face had gone pale. He started to speak, stumbled over his words, then tried again. This is taken out of context. These are standard business relationships. Darren is clearly bitter about his termination and is trying to—" "Are you claiming these contracts don't exist?" Elaine interrupted. "Because we can verify every document he's presented through our own records. The contracts exist, but the characterization is Hartley Strategic Solutions owned by your brother-in-law?" Trevor hesitated. "That's not relevant to—" "Yes or no, Mr. Hartley?" "Yes, but did you disclose that relationship when authorizing a $240,000 contract?" Silence. "Did you present the Global Efficiency Partners restructuring plan to this board before implementing it?" More silence. Elaine looked at the other board members. "I think we've heard enough. Trevor, Greg, please step outside. The board needs to discuss this privately." They left. Greg looked confused. Trevor looked like a man watching his career end in real time. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. When they called everyone back in, Elaine delivered the decision. "Trevor Hartley, effective immediately, you are terminated as CEO for cause. All contracts with vendors connected to your personal network are suspended pending legal review. Greg Wilson, your appointment is rescinded. You will not assume any role with this company. Security will escort both of you from the building." Trevor tried to argue. Elaine raised her hand. We will be conducting a full audit. If additional misconduct is discovered, we will pursue all available legal remedies. You should retain counsel. This meeting is adjourned. I watched them leave. Trevor wouldn't make eye contact. Greg just looked lost, probably still not understanding what had actually happened. Elaine approached me after they'd gone. The board wants to offer you your position back, Darren, with a formal apology and compensation for the disruption. I'd thought about this moment for weeks. I appreciate that, Elaine, but I think it's time for me to move on. I've already been contacted by a materials company in Portland. They're offering a director position with better terms. I think that's the right path forward. She nodded slowly. I understand. For what it's worth, you saved this company. What you did took courage. I just documented the truth, I replied. The rest took care of itself. The aftermath moved quickly. Within 48 hours, Northwest's legal team had frozen all payments to the questionable vendors. Within a week, they'd hired an outside forensic accounting firm to audit every transaction Trevor had authorized. The findings were even worse than what I'd uncovered. The total exposure from his schemes exceeded $12 million in unfavorable contracts and hidden liabilities. The story stayed contained internally. Northwest's board wanted to avoid public scandal, so they settled everything quietly. Trevor signed a separation agreement that included non-disparagement clauses and forfeiture of his severance. He disappeared from the industry entirely. Last I heard, he was working in commercial real estate in Arizona, far from any position where he could do similar damage. Greg Wilson vanished even faster. He'd only been in the position for 6 weeks and had accomplished exactly nothing. I doubt he even understood what he'd been part of. He was just a convenient placeholder, someone Trevor could control while he systematically looted the company. Greg returned to sales somewhere, probably still telling people he used to be an operations manager. As for me, I finished my transition documentation, wrapped up my final responsibilities, and left Northwest on good terms. The board offered me a consulting retainer to assist with the remediation process, which I accepted. It gave me flexible income while I prepared for my next move. The position in Portland came through in April 2025. Cascade Sustainable Materials was a mid-sized company specializing in engineered wood products and eco-friendly building materials. They'd been growing steadily and needed someone to scale their operations while maintaining their environmental commitments. The role was Director of Operations with a salary of $185,000, equity options, and genuine autonomy. More importantly, the CEO was a former engineer who actually understood manufacturing. No golf buddies in executive positions, no shady vendor relationships, just solid business practices. I accepted immediately. My first day at Cascade was in early May 2025. The contrast with Northwest was striking. The facility was smaller but more modern. The staff was younger, more diverse, and genuinely excited about what they were building. During my first week, I met with every department head, toured every section of the operation, and reviewed their current processes. They had good fundamentals but lacked structure. That was something I could fix. Within 3 months, I'd implemented new workflow systems, established vendor management protocols, and created performance metrics that gave us real-time visibility into operations. By August, we'd increased production capacity by 22% without adding staff. By September 2025, we'd secured 2 major contracts with construction firms looking for sustainable materials. The company was positioned for significant growth, and I was finally working somewhere that valued expertise over connections. I didn't gloat about what happened at Northwest. I didn't need to. The industry is smaller than people think, and word travels fast. People knew. When I ran into former colleagues at trade shows or industry events, I could see it in their eyes. A mixture of respect and wariness. They knew I wasn't someone who could be pushed around quietly. Thomas Brennan, my former assistant, reached out in June 2025. He'd stayed at Northwest during the transition but was looking for new opportunities. I brought him to Cascade as my operations coordinator. He deserved it. His work gathering that documentation had been crucial, and his discretion had been absolute. Good people are hard to find. When you find them, you keep them close. My wife Jennifer asked me one evening in late summer if I had any regrets about how everything went down. We were sitting on our back deck in our new house outside Portland, watching the sunset over the hills. It was a fair question. I'd spent 12 years building something at Northwest, and I'd walked away from all of it. No regrets, I told her. I could have stayed quiet, accepted the severance, moved on without saying anything. But that would have let Trevor keep destroying what we'd built. It would have hurt people who'd worked there for decades. Sometimes you have to stand up even when it's uncomfortable. She nodded. You could have been vindictive about it, though, made it public, embarrassed them publicly. That wouldn't have accomplished anything, I said. The goal wasn't revenge. It was accountability, making sure the right people knew the truth so they could make the right decisions. Everything else followed naturally from that. And that was true. I hadn't orchestrated some elaborate revenge plot. I'd simply documented what was actually happening and presented it to people with the authority to act. Trevor destroyed himself with his own choices. I just made sure those choices were visible. The most satisfying part wasn't Trevor's downfall. It was building something better afterward. Cascade has grown significantly in 2025, and we're doing it the right way, investing in people, maintaining quality standards, building genuine partnerships. We're on track to finish the year with strong growth, and the impact feels real and sustainable. I ran into Elaine Robinson at an industry conference in Seattle in late September 2025. She was retired from Northwest's board but still active in industry associations. We grabbed coffee between sessions. "How's Portland treating you?" she asked. "Very well," I replied. "Cascade is everything I hoped Northwest could become. Solid leadership, clear values, room to grow." "You made the right choice leaving," she said. "The board wanted you back, but I think you knew Northwest would always carry that history. Sometimes you need a clean start." "How's the company doing now?" I asked. "Better. The new CEO is competent if uninspiring. They're rebuilding trust with suppliers and staff. It'll take time, but they'll recover." She paused. "What Trevor did could have destroyed that company. If you hadn't spoken up when you did, we might not have caught it until it was too late." "You gave me the platform to speak," I pointed out. "Not everyone in your position would have." "True," she admitted. "But you came prepared with irrefutable evidence. That made all the difference. Too many people complain without documentation. You built a case that couldn't be ignored. That was the lesson, really. Emotion doesn't win, evidence does. When you're facing corruption or injustice, your feelings don't matter. What matters is what you can prove. I could have walked into that board meeting angry and accusatory, and they would have dismissed me as a disgruntled employee. Instead, I walked in calm and prepared, with documents that spoke for themselves. People sometimes ask me if I was scared during those weeks when I was gathering evidence. The honest answer is yes, sometimes. There was always the risk that Trevor would discover what I was doing and find a way to discredit me before I could present my findings. There was the possibility that the board wouldn't care or wouldn't act. There was the uncertainty of whether I'd find another position if I became known as someone who'd exposed his own company's leadership. But staying silent felt worse than any of those risks. I'd spent 12 years building systems that worked, training people, establishing standards. Watching someone dismantle it all for personal profit while pretending it was business strategy. That wasn't something I could accept. Some situations demand action even when the outcome is uncertain. Looking back now, several months after everything happened, I can see how every piece fell into place, not because I engineered some master plan, but because I stayed true to basic principles. Document the truth, act with integrity, and trust that good work speaks for itself. The industry buzz around what happened at Northwest eventually died down. It's already becoming old news, but the lessons stay with me. I've started getting calls from other operations managers facing similar situations. People who've noticed irregularities, suspected corruption, but don't know how to address it without destroying their careers. I give them all the same advice. Keep your emotions out of it. Document everything, find allies in governance, and present facts rather than accusations. Some take the advice, some don't. The ones who approach it methodically usually get results. The ones who act impulsively usually regret it. Cascade continues to exceed expectations. We're growing responsibly, maintaining our environmental standards, and building something that matters. The CEO, Richard Palmer, is 62 and has been transparent about his retirement plans in the next few years. We've already started discussions about succession planning, and he's made it clear that he sees leadership potential in how I've transformed operations here. That conversation isn't urgent. It's still a couple years away, but it's meaningful. It represents the kind of opportunity that comes from doing good work consistently, from building trust through results rather than politics. That's something Trevor could never understand. I thought about Trevor occasionally during the first few months after leaving Northwest, wondering if he'd learned anything from the experience. Probably not. People like him rarely do. They see consequences as unfair rather than inevitable. He'd likely convinced himself that I'd betrayed him, that the board had overreacted, that he'd been the victim of corporate politics. The reality, that he'd betrayed the company's trust and paid the price, probably never registered. That's not my problem anymore. My life now is quieter and better. Jennifer and I are settled in Portland. Our daughters, Emma and Sophie, visit when they're home from college. I'm doing work that matters with people I respect. The situation at Northwest was stressful and disappointing, but it pushed me toward something better. Sometimes that's how growth happens, through disruption that forces you to reevaluate and rebuild. If I could go back and change anything, would I? Maybe I would have documented things sooner, been more skeptical earlier. But the core choice, to speak up rather than walk away quietly, I wouldn't change that. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight isn't dramatic or public. The timber industry moved on. Northwest recovered. Cascade continues growing. Trevor faded into obscurity. The world kept turning. But I learned something valuable through it all. Your reputation is built on what you do when no one's watching and tested by what you do when everyone is. Trevor failed that test. I didn't. That's the difference between someone who takes shortcuts and someone who does the work. Eventually, the shortcuts catch up to you. Eventually, the work pays off. It might not happen on your timeline, and it might not look like you imagined, but integrity has a way of creating opportunities that corruption never can. I didn't destroy Trevor Hartley. He destroyed himself. I just made sure the people who needed to know the truth actually knew it. Everything else, his termination, his industry exile, his replacement, those were natural consequences of choices he made. Justice didn't require my anger or my schemes. It just required transparency. And honestly, that's the most satisfying outcome of all. Watching someone face the natural consequences of their actions while you move forward to something better. No drama, no public confrontation, no burning bridges, just quiet documentation, strategic timing, and the patience to let the truth do the work. Trevor wanted to build an empire on favoritism and fraud. Instead, he built his own downfall. I just held up the mirror. So if you're facing something similar, betrayal, injustice, people in power acting without integrity, here's what I learned. Document everything. Find allies in positions of authority. Present facts calmly and let them speak for themselves. Don't act from anger or revenge. Act from principle and trust that the truth creates its own consequences. Sometimes justice is slow, sometimes it's uncertain. But more often than you might expect, good work and integrity create opportunities that shortcuts and corruption never could. You just have to be patient enough to let the process unfold. Trevor thought he was getting rid of an obstacle. Instead, he set me free. And that's a kind of poetic justice he'll never understand, but I get to live every single day. If you enjoyed this story, hit the like button and leave a comment letting me know what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. And turn on notifications so you'll catch new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.